Joining me now, Ben Horowitz and David Ulevitch of Andreessen Horowitz. We're here at the American Dynamism Conference in Washington, D.C. It's wonderful to be here, and I just want to start, Ben, with the fact that we are seeing this relationship grow between Silicon Valley and Washington. Case in point, this conference here today. How does it speak to how that's changed or transformed over the years?
Well, so it's changed on a couple of fronts. So I think that on the, Silicon Valley was born kind of into Washington, D.C. So the original Silicon Valley was generated as kind of defense technology for World War II. And that was kind of led to the invention of microwave technology, as well as kind of eventually microprocessing technology. And it was to kind of defeat the Nazi kind of stealth fighters and these kinds of things, and radar and all these sorts of ideas. That kind of fell off a lot over the years as things went by, but now we're at this very important point where if you look at the important countries of the last 100 years, they're all countries that got to the Industrial Revolution first. And the whole West was built on that technology base. The next 100 years, the important countries and the countries that dictate the culture of the world and how we live are going to be the ones who get to the information age and AI first. And so it's very important for us that we help America get there, and that's why American Dynamism and what we're doing.
And of course, it raises the question, because you start to hear these debates about where the U.S., particularly against, say, China, for example, is in terms of AI and who ultimately dominates. I guess maybe we could start there with your thoughts on that.
Well, it's really interesting because I think in the kind of public, in the press, it was always China's ahead in AI. Like everything you read was that. And then OpenAI releases ChatGPT and everybody goes, well, maybe they're not ahead in AI. And I think the truth is America's ahead in AI, but the American government is behind the Chinese government in its deployment and use of AI, particularly in a military context. And this is why the conference, this is why David is doing what he's doing. This is kind of how we got here, is that exact thing. And so I think we have we are amazing at technology as a country. And the gap we have to bridge is connecting that to what we do as a government.
Of course, it does put into focus defense tech, which has become, especially in the last couple of years, even as we've seen overall VC funding maybe at a slower pace, we've seen defense tech one of those key areas that's actually seeing more money, seeing more up rounds. How does that speak to how you're approaching it?
Yeah, well, look, we think that, first of all, the men and women who serve our country deserve the best technology. So it's really important that the founders and the entrepreneurs have the support from venture capitalists like ourselves to be able to build that technology so that we have the best capabilities and the best military in the world, and that stays the same going forward. I think we also see there's a lot of tailwinds. The world has gotten to be a little bit of a spicier place, and so we want to make sure that we have the most advanced technology. We want to incorporate the best software, the best AI capabilities. We want to have the most enduring and reliable energy capabilities to support the defense industrial base. So there's a huge amount of opportunity as we talk about moving into this information age that applies to energy, to defense, to space, to communications capabilities. We think it's a huge opportunity, and we think it's also just critically important.
I want to dig into that a little more detail, but software will eat the world. Famous Mark Andreessen quote.
He turned out to be right.
Yeah. He turned out to be right. What does AI do?
Well, AI is kind of the next generation of software. So the way we kind of refer to it, often in computer science world is, we've had deterministic computing and now we have non-deterministic computing or probabilistic computing. So now we can go solve a whole class of problems that you couldn't solve with a program that was 100% going to get to the right answer. So now we have things that get very, very close to the right answer, but they're what we call probably approximately correct. And this opens up a whole new world, and particularly, very interesting areas like a human-computer interface that understands humans that speaks English. So that's probably, that's the first big breakthrough, but we're going to see breakthroughs in areas like robotics. And maybe the most exciting for us is in biology. So, and the way we talk about it in the firm is, if you look at physics, we've been doing physics for thousands of years, but it didn't really get interesting till we had a language for it. And that language was calculus. We've never had a language for biology until now, and that language is AI. AI is the first tool that we've had that can fully describe a human. And this is going to be unbelievably exciting for breakthroughs in, cures of disease, to diagnostics, to everything. And we're really, really fired up about that part.
Yeah, so some of the earliest adoption and applications.
Yes.
How does it play out? You mentioned energy. Energy is obviously one of those areas, especially when we start to talk about national security, key focus right now. Nuclear, for example, getting a lot more attention than it did after being kind of the, for better or worse, I guess, shunned stepchild of the energy complex. How do some of these new capabilities, new technologies now factor into the societal fabric of resiliency?
Sure. Well, look, we have an insatiable thirst for energy. You talk about all the data centers we're going to be building, all these AI data centers. We talk about the EV, the electric vehicle revolution we want to have. All those things take electricity. We need to be able to have a much more reliable and resilient grid. Even putting aside the defense needs for energy, which are tremendous, we just need a massive amount, we have this insatiable thirst, so we need a lot more power. In nuclear energy, we know, it's base load power. That means it doesn't require the wind to be blowing, doesn't require the sun to be out, it just works 24/7 consistently. It's enduring, it's reliable, you don't have to constantly refuel it like a diesel generator would have to be refueled, and it's much cleaner. In fact, I was with some members of the Department of Energy yesterday, and they pointed out, this is kind of a crazy thing, that you actually get more radiation poisoning from a coal plant than from a nuclear power plant. Because we're burning all these carcinogens into the air, some of those things have some radioactive material. And so nuclear power is super safe. It's like, if you don't go to the gym for a long time, your muscles atrophy. So we don't have all the muscle of how to build nuclear reactors. We build one at a time. We just turned one on in Georgia. We're about to turn on a second one. But all those workers who we use to build those plants, they're going to go off and do something else. We don't have a whole lineup of nuclear plants lined up. So there's a whole bunch of investments from very large-scale nuclear power all the way down to small modular reactors. You can imagine that with a nuclear reactor, unlike a diesel generator, you've seen these people truck around these diesel generators at concerts. You could actually have a truck with an 18-wheeler move around a nuclear reactor, and let's say we have a disaster, like a hurricane, you truck in one of these reactors and now the whole town has power. That kind of capability we don't have today, but we're going to need that capability. We're entering a world where we need much more dynamic power, and so it's a huge opportunity, and it's going to power this information age we're moving into and the electrification of all these things in our lives.
This raises a key broader topic, and that is regulation and the role that regulation plays or doesn't play in terms of new innovations and how quickly they're adopted and what that process of transformation and rollout looks like. You recently published a blog called Politics and the Future, and basically talk about the fact that from a firm's perspective, you're going to potentially donate to candidates in this political cycle focused on regulation and specifically not hindering innovation with too much regulation.
Right.
I guess just walk me through that decision and what that actually looks like, how the methodology you're going to use in terms of that.
Yeah, so I'd say it's kind of an interesting kind of path that it took. So, for years, there was no regulation on software. And a lot of that was just because most software was sold to other companies doing other things as opposed to consumers. And that kind of started to change with the consumer internet. And I think what all the policymakers realized was like, well, this is going to affect everybody, how they live, privacy, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to start regulating these areas. But you have to be careful because, one of the things that I'm always struck by is when I'm in Europe, they always say, we're the leaders in regulation. We're behind in innovation, but we're the leaders in regulation. I'm like, you guys don't realize those two things go together? That's the same thing. You outlaw people from building stuff and they don't build stuff, and that's just how it works. So it's really, really important, particularly now, particularly when not only do businesses have to get to the future, but our whole government has to get to the future in order to be competitive with China, in order to be competitive with Russia, in order to be competitive with Iran. So we have to be very, very careful not to overreact to certain incidents, these kinds of things. I mean, the internet we could have shut down. There was lots of cybercrime on it, crime that we never had before, but the benefits were very large. And we see that with crypto, with bio, with AI, and we just want to make sure that the regulation is correct. And I'll give you like a simple example. So with AI, there's things that we shouldn't allow AI to do, things that we don't allow people to do, like tell you how to make a bomb. Like, that should be illegal, and absolutely. And in fact, we have laws that stop that now. What we shouldn't do is say, we're going to regulate math, and it's no longer okay to do math. And it would be the equivalent of, when we figured out nuclear, to say, well, we're not going to worry about the bombs. We're just going to stop you from doing physics. And quite frankly, in the regulation, in the executive order, there's things like of that nature. And so we have to be very careful about that, because one of the things that kind of regulation does, in addition to slowing down the whole industry, is it completely freezes out academia. So that if you're a professor, you no longer have the tools to do AI, because they've been outlawed, because they outlawed physics, or they outlawed math in this case. So we just have to get it right. It's very complicated. It's a new technology. And so we need to do our part to make sure that America stays dynamic.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because there's more nuance than I think is being portrayed in the media in terms of this accelerationist versus doomer debate that's been swirling about AI specifically. But when I hear you talk about that, it doesn't sound like you're not concerned about unintended consequences, but you're concerned about particularly maybe, and tell me whether this is the case, especially in the wake of social media and sort of the focus that lawmakers have on that, and over-regulation.
Yeah, well, look, every technology we've ever built has had from the plow to nuclear to the internet, has had negative consequences, has had consequences of job displacement, but they also had great benefits. And so we just have to make sure that the regulation, curbs the consequences without eliminating the benefits. And a lot of times when a technology is evolving, that's hard to figure out. So that's where we can come in, because we're at the forefront, and we're going to put a big effort into that this year.
Okay. As we talk about American dynamism, I just wonder what that means in terms of, certainly from a military standpoint, there's, China, for example, is considered a pacing threat, but historically, particularly from an investing and tech standpoint, there's been a lot of crossover in terms of investments, and what that now looks like, whether we are actually seeing a decoupling, even as we do talk about something like American dynamism.
Yeah, you're talking about dual use capabilities or companies that build for, or are you talking about the decoupling from China?
I think both. I think it's decoupling from China, and what that looks like from a broader investing landscape and where we're headed in terms of VC activity.
I think even if you look at supply chains during COVID, people realize that it's really important for America and her allies to have a huge manufacturing base, the supply chain for raw ingredients and the resources we need to manufacture products, to make products. We cannot be reliant on somebody that's thousands of miles away who may be a future adversary, maybe an adversary today. So we just need that for our own resilience, and I think that a bunch of our allies recognize that same thing. And when I look at companies in the U.S., and we spend our time investing primarily in the U.S., and we're not making investments in these kind of companies in China, but when we make these investments, we're looking at these companies saying, hey, look, there's a huge world market out there that they can sell to, and there's countries out there that want to have the best capabilities, they want to have the best technology. They know that the Silicon Valley ethos is what creates the most innovative capabilities. One of the reasons we're here in Washington is that people often think of tech and they think it's just the big tech companies, but someone needs to represent the voice of the startups. When we talk about things like regulation or procurement in the DoD or all these government sort of frameworks that you have to interoperate with, when they get overly onerous, it actually has a chilling effect on startups. And it's really important when you think about where do the real breakthroughs come from, where does real innovation come from? It comes from these startups. Whether it's a vaccine or whether it's a new piece of AI capability that helps a drone fly autonomously, you need to be able to support the startups, and that's one of the reasons why we're here in DC and why we support these companies that build for the national interest.
All right, Ben Horowitz and David Ulevitch, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We had a great time. Thank you.